Quick word for evangelists. Out of Luke chapter 5, verse 11 and verse 27, we see something incredible about discipleship, about being a fisher of men, about being one who follows the Lord. These words, left everything, are in verse 11 and verse 27. The disciples left everything and followed him. In verse 27, he left everything behind and got up and followed him. This leaving everything is the very essence of what preaching Jesus and following Jesus looks like. You say, what does it look like to leave everything? Well, let me put it in real simple terms. To follow Jesus, leave everything to follow Jesus, means nothing is allowed to keep you from his presence. You tolerate nothing in his place. No tolerance for things that keep us from his presence. Also, everybody and everything is of far lesser value than him. And I encourage you to ask the question to yourself, is there anything you will not turn your back on for him? Verse 4, we see Jesus said to Simon, put your nets into the deep of the water, let down your nets for a catch. Simon says, we did that already. He says, we worked hard all night. We worked hard all night. Basically, he's saying, we already did that. Human efforts are futile. They don't matter. They're worthless. But even though Jesus tells him to do the same thing he was doing before, because they were casting their nets into the deep before all night long, very hard work, to no avail, Jesus now speaks to them. The difference between the casting is Christ. So he says, I will do as you say. He heard from the Lord. His next cast came from communion with the Lord. And they were listening to him. See, there is no work as wearying as that which is apart from, or that is done apart from communion with Christ. The boats actually begin to sink after the catch comes and the nets begin to break. And Peter falls down at the feet of Jesus. I want to encourage you, as you're seeing the masses come to the Lord as a result of you coming from the Lord, I want to encourage you, fall at the feet of Jesus. In the midst of success, let it be that you fall at the feet of Jesus. In the midst of success, let it be that his feet are where our attention is. Notice that he also says, I am a sinful man. This is important to never forget what we are apart from him. It will keep us low and humble, especially when the nets are breaking and the ship is sinking, from the fruitfulness that comes from obeying God. Casting nets from communion is far better than casting nets without communion. So communion with him, working under his power, brings us to his feet. We must come to his feet and remember that we are nothing. It's interesting too, in verse 12, a man covered with leprosy comes to Jesus, and I always see this leper as myself. I see my brain is full of leprosy. My paradigm is full of leprosy. My heart is full of leprosy. I'm just decaying apart from Christ. And this man, he, in his leprosy, turns to Jesus. This is the essence of prayer. And I encourage every evangelist in this way to see that your seeing is leprous, is decaying, and to turn to Christ and live from that place. It says here, when he saw Jesus, this means he turns aside, he fell on his face. This is the humbling ourselves before him. We recognize our great need for him. We turn our attention to him and we fall before him. And then we see that Jesus is willing to take away the leprosy. Literally, touch us. Oh, come you sick ones to your physician. Christ is a physician, and he loves when you give him employment. So Jesus stretches out his hand and he touches him. There is no greater cure that exists than direct contact with God. I remember Charles Spurgeon once wrote, "Communion with God is a certain cure for every evil." So chapter 5, verse 15 and 16, we see Jesus has large crowds gathering. And it says, "But Jesus often slipped away to the wilderness to pray." It's the greatest advice anybody could ever give to you. Often slip away to a lonely place to pray. This shows us that the crowds and even the message being given itself, even the preaching of the gospel, is inferior to or secondary to coming to him, communion with him. I remember Bunky once said, before we can ever hear the words go, we must first hear the words come. So lastly, verse 31, Jesus says this statement. He says, "It is not those who are well who need a physician, but those who are sick." I believe that there's a divine precept laid before us there that is applicable to more than one thing. And I think the essence of what Jesus is saying is that Jesus communes with those who recognize their need for him. But those that do not recognize their need for him never come to his table. So we express our great need for him by coming to him. So this word for evangelist is let's leave everything else behind. Not only this, but let us come to the world from communion with God. Let our casting come from communion. And that communion that recognizes a great need for him. Because only he can heal these inward sicknesses inside of our hearts. And we can eat with him at his table. So, Father, thank you for everyone who feels called to be an evangelist. I'm asking that you would give them grace in such a way that they will be pulled often to slip away to a lonely place to pray. And that all of their casting will come from communion and not be one who works hard with sweat and tears, wearying himself with effort and trying because there's no communion that brings ease. In your precious name, amen. Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, Jesus speaks to us about prayer. And he says, "When you pray, go into your most private room and closing the door, pray to your Father who sees in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you in the open." This actual text is what the entire course is going to be driving home. We must spend time with God. We're going to talk practically about how to experience him, experiencing and enjoying God from the scriptures. These things have changed my life, and I know the Lord will change yours as well.